Okay, great. Let's get into it. Hi, everyone. My name is Danielle Strasburger. I am a graduate from Harvard College, class of 2018. I'm also one of the co-founders of Harvard Forward and the campaign manager. And we are really excited to have you here tonight, along with some fantastic panelists and two wonderful moderators for a conversation around Harvard and the climate crisis. Before I hand over to these fantastic people to discuss this topic, just wanted to say we had a lot of interest in this event tonight, which we're really grateful to have so many people signing on to listen. If you are new to hearing about Harvard Forward, we'll get more into it in the event, but really briefly, Harvard Forward is a grassroots campaign started by concerned alumni around Harvard's inaction on climate change and also a lack of inclusive governance for recent alumni, as well as generally social responsibility in its investing in other practices. You can learn more at harvardforward.org. We recognize that some people might have found us tonight after reading a letter that's been circulating by some Harvard concerned alumni leaders. We just want to ask everyone that if you have seen that letter, please do make sure to check out our response, which you can read at harvardforward.org/response, and also help share that amongst your networks, because it's quite concerning, some of the unsubstantiated allegations that are being launched about our grassroots campaign. I will drop those links in the chat, but just wanted to address that might be the background of why some people have come to join us tonight. But we've always been a campaign that wants to stay positive and focused on the issues. So tonight we'll be focusing on our panelists and our topics. However, we will have a town hall on Saturday to dive more into questions around how Harvard Forward got started and about how it's been run, if you'd like to join that. But I'll send information out after this event and put information in the chat. Two quick logistical things. First of all, we will be keeping the chat feature closed to attendees to start with. This is just out of an abundance of caution after a previous issue with some random internet Zoom bombers who somehow got onto one of our events. But however, we do have the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. You should see a little Q&A on the right side of the toolbar. You can use that to ask questions during the event. And then when we get to the audience question section of the panel, the moderators will use that Q&A function to look at the questions and pass them on to the panelists, as many as we have time to get through. We're looking forward to a really great conversation and a variety of different panelists with different experiences. And with that being said, I will pass off to the wonderful Bill McKibben and Thea Sebastian. Thea, do you want to start off by introducing yourself?
Absolutely. So thank you to everybody who showed up online here tonight. We're really excited that you're here for this conversation, and we really do want it to be a conversation. So please do start submitting questions at whatever point something strikes your mind. So as Danielle mentioned, my name is Thea Sebastian. I am one of the 5 Harvard Forward candidates for the Board of Overseers. In addition to that, I am a graduate of Harvard College, class of 2008, and a graduate of Harvard Law School, class of 2016. My full-time job is that I lead policy for a nonprofit organization called Civil Rights Corps, which works to end systemic injustice in the criminal legal system, including injustice based on class, based on race, and all the other inequities within the criminal injustice system. So with that being said, I will turn it over to my co-moderator for the night, Bill McKibben.
Thea, what a pleasure to get to work with you tonight. I'm the old person here. I got out of Harvard College way back in 1982. I was the president of the Crimson back in the day, which was mostly what I did at Harvard. And I got on to be both a writer and an activist. I wrote the first book about climate change, a book called The End of Nature in 1989. And I've kept writing other books since and helped organize the kind of first iterations of a global climate movement at 350.org and keep doing that work. And part of it's been kind of helping launch with some friends this planet-wide divestment campaign that's become the largest corporate campaign in history. We're at about $14 trillion in endowments and portfolios that have divested, including this April. Oxford University, and I've done what I could to get my alma mater to join in that band over the years, including spending a couple of nights sleeping in the shrubbery outside Massachusetts Hall but I'm even happier that other people have figured out this path forward at Harvard Forward. I think it's incredibly great thing that's underway here. And let me just say, I think we might talk a little bit about it later. Let me just say in passing that one should not be daunted by the fact that there are people at leadership positions in Harvard's alumni network trying dirty tricks at this point and casting aspersions and things. It's a pretty good sign that what people are doing is working and has the powers that be a little rattled. So we're down in the closing stretch of this work. Such thanks to everybody at Harvard Forward. And now let's hear from the people. Let's have people just introduce themselves, do you think? Just so everybody can know who they are, and then you and I will dig in with some questions.
Sounds great. Jayson, do you want to maybe start us off?
Great. Yeah, I can. Thanks, Thea, and thanks, Bill, for giving our introductions. So I'm Jayson Toweh. I'm one of the 5 Harvard Forward candidates. I graduated from the Harvard School of Public Health in 2019, and I currently live in Atlanta, Georgia, where I work for the Environmental Protection Agency, and I do evaluations on the various federal water programs across the country. It's been great being part of the campaign and getting to meet many of you, and I'm looking forward to this last week as we have a chance to make history as we finish up the election for the Board of Overseers.
Wonderful. Dr. Natalia, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Natalia Linos, and I graduated from the college in 2003 and then did my master's and my doctorate degree also at the School of Public Health. Currently, I am the executive director of a Center for Health and Human Rights at Harvard. I'm here in my personal capacity, not in my Harvard capacity. I'm also running for Congress in Massachusetts, and climate change is a big part of my platform, so I'm very excited for this conversation. And I worked at the UN for a decade looking at climate and health, the intersection of climate and health.
Wonderful. And kick it over to Dr. Ned. Could you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Ned Hall. I'm a professor in the philosophy department here at Harvard. I started here in 2005 and came here from MIT. And I guess I have 2 connections to the divestment movement at Harvard. One is the more obvious one. I was part of a cabal of faculty who over the last year and a half put together an effort that culminated in a vote on the faculty floor in February, a non-binding, given the way our governance works, in favor of divestment, and that passed by close to 90%. And the other connection is more personal. One of the other founders of Harvard Forward, Nathan Goldberg, was my senior thesis student. So I feel exceptionally proud of him along a number of dimensions.
Wonderful. And last but not least, Joseph.
Hi, thank you. So my name is Joseph Winters. I'm a super senior at the college, meaning I have 1 semester remaining. I'm from Washington State, currently living in Seattle, and I study Earth and Planetary Science and Environmental Science and Public Policy, and have been involved with the divestment, the student divestment campaign since last fall. So.
Wonderful. So Bill, do you want to maybe start things off with our first question?
Absolutely. Ned, let's start with you because you're used to making students answer questions. So it seems only fair that we should pick on you first. You're a philosophy professor. Does a background in philosophy help one figure out how to think about the climate crisis? And why do you think so many faculty members across so many disciplines have ended up united on this issue? Is this really just one we should leave to the physicists, or is actually this the issue that kind of busts up the silos around a place like Harvard?
Right. So let me take those in order. Being a philosopher it's a little bit odd, right? Because my research is not centrally focused on the climate. And it's not because of my research that I got into it. It was really because of a very intense conversation with our older son. But that said, there are some things that the philosophical background, I think, helps me bring to the table. One is philosophers are just contrarian by nature. So when we're told like, well, you know, it's unrealistic to try to sort of really reduce carbon CO2 emissions on a rapid time scale because we have to use, say, market incentives and those work slowly, I'm inclined to think like, well, what sorts of background ideologies are constraining the way you're thinking about the solution space? No, and we're not afraid of like exploring outside the box ideas. Like that's all we do. Like in philosophy, the crazier the better in some ways. So the contrarianism, I think, helps. Another thing that has helped me, I think, is just in philosophical work, we're always trying to clarify arguments. And unfortunately, in debates about climate change and divestment especially, you do see, I think they tend to come from one side more than the other, arguments that are often tissue thin. And there's a lot to say about this, but I'll just call out one in particular, the argument from hypocrisy, which is one of the more conceptually confused arguments one hears, that we shouldn't divest because we still have to, use fossil fuels to keep the lights on. I won't, but I could go on all night about how confused that is. But for philosophers, like we're very impatient with that kind of sloppy thinking. And I think that's really important for all of us to exercise our impatience. And the last thing I'll say about being a philosopher is we are omnivorous by nature, so it's very easy for us to establish connections with people in other disciplines, and that's really helpful in this case for the reason you pointed to in your second question, Bill, which is I think the climate change just spans disciplinary boundaries. It just runs roughshod over them. It's not just a technological problem. It's not just an economic problem. It's also a cultural problem. It's also a problem where really getting to the bottom of it requires knowing your history. So this is one where when it comes to the curriculum, say, it's really all hands on deck.
That was wonderful, thank you. Well, before I became a lawyer, I was a teacher, which means that I obviously am gonna have to call on the one student who is on this panel. So this question is for Joseph. So Joseph, would love to know just what is your own story in terms of why you became involved with divestment at Harvard? And then beyond that, I'd be really curious for your thoughts on what you see as the role of climate activism among students in addressing this crisis overall.
Sure, yeah, thank you for that question. So when I got to Harvard in 2016, I didn't really know anything about divestment or the divestment movement. And, I'm thinking about what Ned said about kind of constraining ideologies. And that was really all that I had been exposed to in terms of environmental activism and action, very like individual action based things like, washing your laundry with a cold wash or things like that. And even when I got to Harvard, those were the kinds of opportunities that were most readily available to me. Like that was, if I wanted to be engaged in environmental work, those were the options that I could choose between. It was teaching people how to switch their light bulbs or things that I felt like were really incommensurate with the sense of urgency that I personally felt about this escalating climate crisis. And for a long time, this is from someone who didn't really know about those constraining ideologies, let alone I couldn't name them. So it felt really constricting. And so I took a semester off my junior spring, and from afar, I saw sort of this resurgence of the divestment campaign in the news. People were doing actions. There was a week-long series of protests called Heat Week. People were wearing orange during graduation, and I thought, this feels like so different than all of the other environmental campaigns and organizations that I have seen on campus before. And I was really excited to participate when I got back to campus in the fall. And so when I did, I started organizing almost immediately. I think on the first day of classes, we had a musical celebration rally outside of President Bakau's house. I helped organize a mock oil spill outside the Smith Campus Center. We did the occupation of the Yale Bowl during the Harvard-Yale football game. And so all of this felt like the scale of action that I was sort of hungry for. Plus the community has really been meaningful to me. I've made a lot of good friends through divestment. And then the second part of your question, and I'll keep this brief, what do I think the role of student activism is? I think that, there's been a lot of talk about or one criticism we get is, Harvard's withdrawing its its financial support from the fossil fuel industry is obviously not single-handedly going to cripple like multinational oil companies that are incredibly wealthy, but it's about stripping these companies of their social license to continue operating. It's about, I mean, it's definitely a political statement. It's saying like, actually, it's not okay to continue exploiting people and the planet and leading us down this path of irreversible and catastrophic climate change. And I think that that is so clear to students whose futures are on the line, and our children's futures too. And just the hypocrisy rings really true for students at any university that claims to be preparing them for a bright and promising future. So yeah, sort of like making that call to these powerful institutions to make that political statement that can begin to dismantle the fossil fuel industry's social license.
Bill, I think you're on mute. Bill, you're on mute.
Even, let me turn to Natalia for a minute, if you can hear me. Even for a Harvardian, you have an impressive resume. You're director of Harvard Center for Health and Human Rights, but you worked at the UN, you worked for the city of New York, you've been your spare time running for Congress. So you have some serious experience with big, unwieldy institutions. Give us some sense of why it is that they're as slow as they are in dealing with what are obviously the pressing crises facing the world, but then give us some idea of why it is that when they move into action, they can be so important.
Thanks, Bill, for that question. And I think the second part, the optimism part, is where we should focus the majority of the answer. I mean, the why institutions move slowly and the bureaucracy and the hierarchies and who the decision makers are, those are complex questions. But at the UN, I have worked with youth activists from across the world who have been pushing the UN, which is a bureaucracy and which is governed by member states coming together, often older men, I must say, in rooms to discuss and debate and negotiate. And you have the youth outside the door pushing and saying, we demand more. And I have seen real progress at the UN through that energy and that movement. And so that's one, I need to say that, big institutions can be pushed, and a bottom grassroots effort is a true way to push forward. Now, why there's hope. I think that institutions matter. Obviously, the UN matters, and we don't need to go into that, but Harvard matters. Harvard matters not only because of the moral message that it sends by divesting, but in its education. I have met so many Harvard grads who are in either leadership positions at the UN, they are ministers of environment, they are ministers of health, they are prime ministers, or staffers to those ministers. So Harvard's education could really be transformational in terms of what priorities people are bringing to the table. And so in my, career across academia and public policy and public service, I have found that actually being able to talk many languages, and as Ned said, this kind of interdisciplinary, being able to speak to different people and to find, a way of convincing them. And, I came to climate and environmental justice through a social justice lens. Most of my research as a social epidemiologist has been around racial inequities, around social justice, and it became so apparent that these are overlapping. And what I have found extremely promising is how young people across the world are able to talk the language across and connect the dots. And I think institutions like Harvard can enable more of that systems thinking to help us move forward. So I am hopeful. I am hopeful that there is a moment in time right now where the public is willing to take on, the climate crisis as a real crisis. And I am hopeful that new disciplines, including mine, the health professionals, are stepping in to say that this is a health crisis as much as it is, a climate crisis. And if we can get others to say this is a racial justice crisis, this is a gender equality crisis, then that, movement building can happen, and institutions are key there too.
Terrific. And I do just want to say on a personal note, the point that you made is so valuable. So as somebody who is a civil rights lawyer by training, that really was my nexus to dealing with climate change, right? Is that we're dealing with racial inequities across the system every single day. And the climate crisis is only going to exacerbate that, right? It is a matter of social justice. Climate justice absolutely is racial justice. So thank you for making that connection. All right, well, I will now turn it over to my compatriot, Jayson. So Jayson, as one of the Harvard Forward candidates, you have spent the last 10 months really building this grassroots effort to have alumni vote in this election for candidates who are going to really take the climate crisis seriously through divestment, through education, through all the other initiatives that are in the Harvard Forward platform. So what I would just love to know is, on the campaign trail, what has been the reaction of alums? And then the second part of the question is, why do you think that Harvard alumni should care?
Yeah, so no, I'm glad to hear it. So on the campaign trail, it's been amazing to see the response from alums in all different states and countries and through different generations. Prior to things shutting down due to the pandemic, it was always great to host different events in my home city, Atlanta, but also when I was traveling for work and got to do some events in California and some other states. And a lot of things that we heard as we were doing these is, people really were proud or excited that we were able to, take a stand on these issues and work for them. And this, segued into us getting over 4,500 alums signing our petition to get us on the ballot, which showed wide sweeping support. And I guess to answer kind of like, why, alums like, I guess why alums should care about what Harvard's doing is that, Harvard, we all, whether we're actively engaged at the university or not, Harvard is a part of us, and they helped, shape our individual education, and they continue to help shape education and learning for generations to come. And the reason that alums should care about their actions, especially when it comes to, their environmental actions and social responsibility and investment practices, is that no matter whether we like it or not, we're connected to the university. So when someone sees our name, they see our degree, we're associated with them. And so, for example, in my field, since I work, in the environmental space, in my opinion, I want to be representing, or related to institutions that are actively, representing these interests and are making a key stance on something that, everyone can agree is horrible. I don't think there's any debate that fossil fuels are bad for health, that they're driving climate change, and they're leading to a huge amount of inequity across the world. So to continue to invest in an institution like that is denying the science, the information of that this is a horrible and hurtful practice. So that's why alumni care, is the fact that we need to make Harvard a global leader in these fields as we are associated with them, as they continue to teach aspiring leaders who are then going to make change in their own respective fields. And like I said, we've gotten a large amount of support, and I'm just excited to see what things happen in this next week as we finish up.
That's a profound and great answer. And I want to do a question that kind of for everybody, and let each of you reflect for a minute. A word that we talk a lot more about now than we did in my day, thank heaven, is the word privilege. And there's no bigger bastion of privilege in North America than Harvard University. So as we think about that, try to explain what from your roles as faculty, as students, as alumni, as staff, what obligation, what responsibility does that privilege confer on people? I mean, doesn't this need to go in both ways in a serious fashion? And I'll just take turns, y'all.
Bill, let me jump in because running this, I'm running for Congress here in Massachusetts in District 4, which is, Brookline, Newton, parts of it. And I've gone all the way down to Fall River. And that's the question I've been getting. You're at Harvard and you have 3 degrees from Harvard, and yet you have let Harvard not pay attention to us. In Fall River, there's inequalities, we've lost jobs, and Harvard has done nothing. And one commitment I have made while running this campaign is that I'll make sure that if I don't win, that I'll use the Harvard FXB Center to pay attention right here, as well as overseas. Health and human rights is global and local. And I do think that we have failed so many communities right in our neighborhood, and we are continuing to fail the global scale. So I'm just wanted to bring that up because it's something that has come up conversation after conversation with constituents or potential constituents who say, Harvard is responsible. Look at, your land use, what you're doing, and your practices, and how are you going to guarantee that, you're going to hold them to account? And so I'm excited to be part of that conversation. And on a personal note, I think privilege also, a conversation that comes up a lot with my, potential voters is that in Brookline, Newton, there's a lot of public transportation. So I have the privilege to be in a car-less household. I can walk to work, I can take public transportation, but much of Massachusetts doesn't have that. And thinking through urban planning and policy, I think, from the UN, that conversation is top of mind. How can cities really serve their citizens to have, better public transportation? But for some reason, Massachusetts isn't having that conversation. And Harvard is here. And could we bring more of the architecture students and more of the others to think about climate mitigation at home, meaning Massachusetts?
Yeah, if I could just add from the faculty perspective, Bill, it's a great question. There's a lot to say in response. One thing is, I think that's super important for faculty, given that we're often, we're the students are maybe too much in awe of us. I always joke with my students at the start of the semester, if you really have to call me Professor Hall, that's okay, but Ned is fine too, or if you're cheeky, you can call me Professor Ned, and that helps break things down a bit. But I think it's really important for us to establish the kinds of connections with students where they realize that we've got their back. And that comes to their political back. I think it was very, very important for faculty to really get on board with this divestment effort. But also educationally, I think it's important for us as faculty not to think, well, we've made it to this pinnacle of academic achievement, and so we are wise and sage enough to know what you, the undergraduates, need to learn. Sure, there's stuff we know that you undergraduates need to learn that undergraduates may not be aware of, but there's also stuff, a case to be made for us to listen to students and really think about what kind of world are we bequeathing you? Not a great one. Well, okay, given that, and given that we have this opportunity, thanks to our privilege to make a difference to you, how can we turn our scholarship in a direction where it will help you? Teach you the kinds of courses that will equip you to go face the challenges that you're inevitably going to face, better, as opposed to teaching you the cool thing that we loved most when we were an undergraduate. So those are a couple of things that your question brought to mind.
Yeah, if I could just add one more thing. I thank so much Natalia and Ned for that. But I also think that a lot of the justification for the divestment movement falls on the fact that we as students have a direct stake in, creating a livable future. But also a big part of our movement is grounded in the belief that Harvard has a moral obligation not only to its students but to the rest of the world. It has this enormous social and cultural influence that it needs to use to protect the people and communities that are going to be disproportionately impacted by climate change. And so that is something that came to mind from the privilege perspective.
Yeah, yes, and I'll echo a lot of the sentiments that have been said. And just real quick, like I said, from an alumni perspective, we have the ability to set an example for the university and have the university then set an example for other universities.
Like I said, it's Harvard. What Harvard does is very notable. So as we work on this divestment movement, if we're able to knock down this domino, we can help make systematic change in many universities across the United States and the world. So it's great as alumni to help push Harvard in that direction.
Great. Well, I'm mindful we do want to go to Q&A soon, but maybe let me just throw out one more question and just anybody who wants to answer it can dive in. So institutions that are like Harvard, which have been around for a while, can sometimes be set in their ways. So I am just curious, from each of your different vantage points, right, whether that is pushing for divestment amongst faculty, whether that is running an insurgent campaign to try to get onto the board of overseers, whether that is creating an oil spill somewhere at a Harvard campus. I'm just curious, like, what has the reaction been? And what have you found most effective at really navigating those sorts of pressures that are coming back at you? And again, let's kick it to whoever has something on the top of their mind for that.
I think on the faculty side, it was really important to be patient about building a case for divestment because of faculty culture. And we did that last fall by having a series of presentations and discussions at the Faculty of Arts and Sciences meetings that just systematically built the argument. And it was really kind of encouraging. It made me feel very optimistic about our institution, how effective that was. We weren't sure it would be, but we had plenty of faculty who were like, I've heard the case for divestment, I've heard the case against. Case for is like obviously much stronger, that's the way I'm going. So that I think was an important part. I think there is another thing that's harder for faculty, which is to sort of realize that we have political muscles that we can collectively flex. And unfortunately, I think those muscles have atrophied over the last 20 years or so. There's much less of a culture of faculty governance here. And that's, I'm sure the reasons for that historically are complex, but for us, the next stage is going to be, we're working on building up those muscles so that, now that the corporation has announced a sort of halfway measure that's not yet what we want, and as far as I can tell, logically inconsistent, we can, as a faculty, do our part to sort of hold their feet to the fire and hold Larry's feet to the fire as well.
Well, let me weigh in with one more question here before we go to the Q&A, if that's okay. And I guess it's just kind of the money question in a way. I mean, as we said earlier, we're at about $14 trillion around the world with this divestment campaign. The University of California is divested. Brown and Cornell have divested. Oxford is divested. So far this year, the Pope and the Queen have come out for divestment, leaving, I don't know, Beyonce as our, the only person who hasn't. What the hell is it actually going to take to get Harvard, where so much of the original climate science was done, where so many people have worked so hard on this issue, what is it actually going to take to push Harvard to the point where it finally uses its name to try and move us on the gravest challenge we've ever faced as a civilization? And anybody can weigh in.
I have a thought, and I don't have an answer. I'm not going to answer your question, but I have a thought that Harvard is going to tell you right now that with COVID, it's going to be very hard. We've been hit hard, and the economy. I do think maybe, Ned, engaging some of the public health folks right now, kind of the COVID folks who are saying that COVID is zoonotic, that, this crisis is linked to our environmental, like maybe getting some of that energy. Obviously tobacco is like so bad, nobody would touch it. Somehow if you get some of the health folks to say, COVID and our future health depends on Harvard divesting, not just divesting, but taking real action on climate, and divesting is the easiest, fastest way. I really worry that they're going to use COVID as an excuse. So maybe getting ahead of that would be important at some point.
Yeah, very good idea. Taking notes.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, yeah, framing all the interconnections that divesting has, like the public health benefits, you know, as we are faced with more health potential pandemics coming from, you know, like you said, zoonotic diseases or vector-borne, like showing that this isn't a one-time thing and that we are continually driving it. You know, also doubling down on the fact that a lot of the principles that Harvard says that it wants, you know, wants to be inclusive, it wants to be equitable, wants to be like a key foundational learning institution. But it says all those things, but you know, having your hands tied in an industry like fossil fuels inherently does not make you have that. You know, inherently you are hurting the health of individuals, leading to economic inequality as you are, you know, deteriorating communities that are experiencing these impacts, fossil fuels, you know, and which can also lead to additional burdens and wealth and welfare and education. So really putting all those linkages down and discussing that, you know, being in this and still investing in this industry does not lead you to reaching all of those goals that you say that you have.
Yeah, I just want to add that I think it's a really important question to consider because, I mean, all of the things that we thought would work have not worked so far. I mean, we've shown Harvard that its own community wants divestment. You know, a majority of the college students have voted in favor of divestment. The faculty, the FAS and the medical school have both voted for divestment. Obviously, you know, thousands of alumni have asked for divestment. And so, you know, beyond the public image thing where, you know, the Pope and whoever else have asked for divestment, Harvard's not listening to its own community. And that's where I think like we have room to exert, you know, a lot of pressure, clearly showing that, you know, students and faculty and other people in the Harvard community are not okay with Harvard's stance on climate change. It needs to act more aggressively, more quickly. So yeah, I see the potential for, you know, things like greater civil disobedience, those kinds of things to make it clear how unacceptable this is.
I'll add one note of optimism. The corporation in its response in the spring did say, in response to the pressure that they felt from faculty and students, that they were embarking on a plan to, quote, decarbonize the portfolio. On too long a time scale, they set 2050, it should be sooner. But that was a key concession because they've now put off the table the argument that, well, divestment would be a political move and we can't do politics in the endowment. They've already said that for political reasons, basically, they're going to decarbonize the portfolio. So that was a crucial win. And it's also, there's another opening because there's an obvious question to raise, which we have raised and not received an adequate answer to. How do you decarbonize a portfolio without divesting? Right, that's the logical inconsistency. And I think if we hammer on that and take advantage of Natalia's strategy too, then I think we have reason to think we could push them to, you know, as it were, clarify their position, you know, in a year from now and say, well, okay, maybe divestment will be included as one strategy in decarbonizing.
Let me just add, as we go to Q&A, that the saddest part, in a sense, of all of this is that in its refusal to divest, Harvard's managed to lose tons of money over the last decade by deeply investing in the worst part of the economy, the one that's not making any money at all. So I guess that means we should admire them for their principle. Philosophically speaking, their willingness to, you know, throw away all the money that alumni are sending them on investing in Exxon. But one more reason to actually get serious about this and do it fast. So Thea, how are we going to do this? Let's go to these questions from Q&A. Do you want to ask a few of them?
Sure, I can absolutely kick things off. So there was a question I was going to ask, which I believe was already addressed, Ed, but once we get to your answer, feel free to add if you think there's anything else you want to say about the recent proposal by Harvard and why it's insufficient. But again, I think you really addressed the crux of that, but do just want to mention that was a question. The question that I would love to throw out to the whole group is from Anne Christine, and it is, can the panelists review the common arguments given by faculty/leadership against divestment And what are the fact-based counter arguments? And I was thinking for this, maybe we could actually just have each person who feels so moved to just present one argument that they have heard, and then just very briefly, like what you think is the strongest counterpoint to that. And Ned, since I know you have really lived and breathed this more than anybody else, we'll happily kick it to you first.
Sure. So just to expand on something I said before, one standard argument is that divesting is hypocritical because we have to use fossil fuels. And I think the most straightforward counter argument is to just clarify what hypocrisy is. I'm being hypocritical if I espouse certain values in public, but it's clear by my actions that I'm not undertaking a good faith effort to do the best I reasonably can to live up to those values. No, it's not to be hypocritical if my values require something ideally that the society does not make attainable, right? We're maybe just expand a little bit. One situation we're all unfortunately in is that we can't live it's impossible to live a morally pure life. It's impossible not to be complicit in various evils. That's just a fact of life. And to call out those evils as evils while knowing that you are unavoidably at least somewhat complicit in them is not to be hypocritical. It's to be sort of tragically honest, if you like. So that's one argument. It's less a matter of like marshaling facts against it and more a matter of just getting clear in your own mind about the moral reasoning, about what hypocrisy really is.
One I'll say is that individuals say that divesting won't make any changes or any benefits to the actual climate crisis. And my counter is that it will. I mean, it's pretty simple. You're taking money out of these industries that are driving the climate change and causing all these impacts. And now you can put that money into resources that will alleviate it. So whether it's from new clean tech and clean energy sources or mitigation efforts, as we have to realistically adapt to a changing climate. So like I said, you definitely put that money into things that will actually alleviate the climate crisis.
One that comes to mind for me is the argument that Harvard can't use its endowment for political reasons, and Ned sort of already touched on this, but my favorite counter argument is that not only is divestment a political act, but investment is political as well. And by choosing to invest in any given industry, Harvard is making a political statement saying that like we endorse the actions that this industry is taking and are okay with it continuing. So to say that it's not okay to divest from something because it would be a political statement is false. And as Ned said, the corporation has already acknowledged that it is willing to take that political step towards decarbonizing, even though it's too late.
All right. Natalia, anything to add or want me to go to the next question?
I mean, I haven't been as involved in these conversations, but it sort of links. There's an anonymous attendee who put a question there about the fiduciary responsibility. And I think that is a common thread of, can we say that the endowment will perform just as well? And that is something I have heard. And then I don't have the answer, but I'd love to hear from Ned and Bill. My thinking is, one is, should we change our metrics? If there are all these other, impacts, like should we be looking at performance with the same metrics? And second, is Harvard's endowment and other universities big enough that they, investment, sort of as what Joseph said, if they all invested in sort of clean energy technology, could that boost the endowment? Like, I don't actually have the answer, but I'd actually want that, Ned, maybe, or Bill.
Sure, I can start, but I suspect Bill will have lots more to say. So one thing is it's going to depend on what time frame you're looking at. Maybe if you're really, really, really clever, well, not in the last 10 years, but maybe in the near future, if you're super clever, you can make money off fossil fuels. But on a longer time horizon, which presumably is the one that the Harvard Corporation should be focused on, we know that known reserves of fossil fuels cannot be burned safely. So those are going to be, unless we do things really badly as a sort of global society, those are going to be stranded assets. But Bill, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this question too.
Sure, I'll just quickly say two things. One, you know who Jim Cramer is? Harvard class of 80 or 79, I think, and America's favorite stock picker. He's the guy who goes on CNBC every night and yells at Americans about what stocks to buy and what stocks not to buy. Well, in January, long before the pandemic, Cramer went on his nightly show and said, you know what? No one should invest in big oil going forward because, you know what, there's just too much divestment around the world. It's made it a complete money loser, and it's never going to make any money. And that was proof not only of the power of this divestment campaign, but also of the folly of continuing to invest in this stuff. In fact, Natalia, you're right. It'd be a good idea to have metrics that reflected lots more things than simply financial return. But even with the metrics we've got, you're definitely getting a better financial return by staying the hell away from coal and gas and oil. Two reasons for that. One, because they're causing the climate crisis, they're increasingly coming under regulatory pressure. Two, the people who doing engineering around sun and wind have figured out how to provide the same product, but cheaper and cleaner. So, you know, the fossil fuel industry is getting squeezed between pincers. Let me just add, as I'm talking about that, to try to deal with one of the other questions that someone asked, which is, shouldn't we be spending this energy, mental power, whatever, on policy questions instead of on divestment? The answer obviously is yes, we should, but the point of doing divestment is, until we manage to break the political power of the fossil fuel industry, the ability to get policy enacted is very limited. It's not that we haven't known for 30 years basically what we need to do to deal with the climate crisis. It's that we haven't been able to do it because these companies have kept a hammerlock on our political system. And that is beginning to yield now as things like divestment really bite. And it's why it's so important, I think, to push harder and harder right now, which is why the timing of this election is so important. Thea, your turn.
Great. This might be the last question that we have time to ask. So I'm actually just gonna merge together 3 different questions that were in the chat, but I promise it's gonna work, guys. So there was one question that, Joseph, I think you'll be in the best position to answer, which is from an incoming freshman to Harvard who's really interested in getting involved with environmental activism. So in addition to Fossil Fuel Divest Harvard, would love to hear your thoughts on just like what it is that she should be getting into. Pause on that. Then the next question is from a graduate student who's interested in knowing how other players at Harvard, so in particular at the graduate schools, can really put pressure on their institutions to make change. And so that question, I think, works for both Ned and for Natalia. And then Jayson, there's a question floating around about the role of the overseers. So I think these are all different vantage points. There's like, what can undergrads be doing to make change? There's what can graduate students do to make change? And then there's what can alums do? And you're running for the board of overseers to really try to get Harvard to act in the climate crisis. Well, I think then the very logical question is, what do the overseers have to do with climate change, right? Like, what kind of change will you be able to make if you are elected to that role? Okay, so that was long-winded, but hopefully that gives everybody something to engage on. Joseph, do you want to kick it off for us?
Sure, so I have 2 thoughts for this incoming freshman. First of all, welcome. And I will say that besides Fossil Fuel Divest Harvard, the other organization that definitely comes to mind is Harvard Undergrads for Environmental Justice. That's the group that Fossil Fuel Divest Harvard was born out of. And they engage in a much broader range of environmental issues. Obviously, you know, environmental justice is about so much more than like the warming climate. It's about, you know, disproportionate impacts of toxic pollution and things like that. And so they work on a number of smaller campaigns, or not smaller, but like different campaigns. And I definitely think that you should check them out. The other thing though, is that one thing that I really think Harvard needs to be better at going forward is promoting a sort of broad environmental lens where all of these different fields of study can be viewed through the lens of the climate crisis, because it is going to touch every single aspect of our lives. There's no way to silo the different concentrations of the different groups into their own categories. As we grow up, like there's going to be no way to keep the climate crisis separate from what we end up doing. So pursuing any sort of extracurricular group, and one, something that comes to mind is like writing for the Crimson or for the Harvard Political Review or something like that, and using that platform to talk about climate justice and the need for divestment. I think that there are opportunities in a lot of different organizations to engage with climate justice and environmental justice and those kinds of issues. So yeah, those would be my two thoughts.
Great. Can I kick it over to Ned? Do you have something to add on this?
Oh, yeah. Can you just sorry, I was multitasking before, Thea, so just super quickly recap the question.
Sure. Just what do you think that graduate students in particular can do to pressure their institutions to make change?
Yeah. So there are probably a lot of things, but I think one good pressure point would be curricular reform. Graduate students are going to be going into positions where they're going to be the teachers now for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And they're in a position where it's going to be very important to just their livelihood as academics that they be able to teach in a much more interdisciplinary way. And the topics we're talking about are going to be front and center in college and university curricula. I think in the coming decades. So there are probably lots of other things too, but that's one thing that's on my mind, is like they should be demanding the kind of preparation that they need. And that means that their faculty mentors can no longer think, well, what do you mean what kind of preparation? We're just going to prepare you to do the stuff we've done. That's been the model. I say this from the inside, and that model is not going to work anymore. That model of mentorship has to go.
And I'll just add, rather than trying, and I speak as someone who is an executive director of a center that is an endowment center, and a lot that I don't know. Like if a graduate student came to me and said, this is how it works, this is how you can push for it, like make it easy. I think a lot of staff, a lot of administrators don't actually understand how decisions are made even centrally, because intentionally or not, the endowment sort of, we get a number, this is what your endowment percent goes up and down, and we don't get much insight into how that decision was made. So maybe assume that your administrator or the people you're trying to pressure might not be against it, they're just maybe clueless, not to admit that I'm clueless. And so go to them with some of the information, talk to Ned, organize and make it easy for them to then make their arguments. I think that would be very helpful.
And I'll just add, so yeah, the question on the Board of Overseers, and I think we've, being part of Harvard, gotten kicked around a lot, even in recent days, with someone that I met saying, this is that Board of Overseers, how can you change? And I'll say, we're still the second highest governing board at Harvard. You're mainly consulting with people saying what we want, So collectively coming together as a board can really help us show the president of Harvard College, the Harvard Management actually make these actions. And additionally, the board has a lot of responsibility in academics. So about having increasing climate change research opportunities for students. That's a key factor, because as you bring in more faculty or more students, the whole we need to work for the future. At best, really start to grow at the university and obviously within EPRs. So we can directly affect that, and we can directly apply pressure to the Harvard Corporation to basically actually change since the main the main consultant and coming from a high level. So I'm seeing voting, also for HSPH board director positions, not just staying active in their communities, and also as they bring their dollars forward and and donate. That's a huge thing. I want my money used for this. So there's ways now we have a huge amount of power to make change.
Got it. So I think it was a little bit hard to hear all that answer. So let me just say really, really quickly to add on to what Jayson said. First of all, if you are new to Harvard Forward, on our website, we actually have a Q&A that answers all these sorts of questions. And we actually have a lot written about this exact issue of what is it that overseers can do. But I do just want to name what for me is the biggest point, which is that this election is about sending a message and creating a mandate for change. And so that is one of the biggest ways that this election can play a role. If we elect 5 people who have run on a platform that says Harvard divest from fossil fuels, what that says to Harvard is, guess what alumni care about? And the thing is, alumni matter to Harvard, right? Alumni are the backbone of the Harvard community. So if the alumni really unite behind this one idea, which is get us out of the business of investing in this unconscionable industry, the administration will really have to listen. But again, more answers to that question you can find on the Harvard Forward website. Okay, with that being said, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over back to Danielle.
Great, thank you so much. That was a really fascinating conversation. Thank you to all speakers and panelists and moderators. We're gonna really quickly, we're running a little bit over on time, give a platform to some of our co-hosting organizations who've helped spread the word about this event tonight and are doing great work themselves. So really briefly, up first is the Graduate Environmental Action Team.
So hello everybody, my name is Arya Call, I'm the treasurer for the Environmental Action Team. Just echoing what the other presenters said, if you're interested in, if you're a graduate student and you're interested in environmental issues, we'd love to have you join our organization. You can find our group on Engage. And we're active in a lot of different things, but currently we're focused on the upcoming November election and ensuring that people who care about the environment are the ones who get elected.
Great, thank you. Okay, next up, Harvard Undergraduate Clean Energy Group. Oh, I think, sorry, it looks like they weren't able to join tonight, my mistake. Students for Environmental Awareness in Medicine.
Yes, hello everyone. My name is David Mazumder and I'm a fourth-year medical student at Harvard Medical School and on the board of Students for Environmental Awareness in Medicine. We try to advocate for local sustainability in the Longwood medical area, especially with Harvard Medical School, Harvard School of Public Health, Harvard School of Dental Medicine, and all of the affiliated hospitals in that area. There are any number of ways that, that we feel that the medical institutions need to take the issue of climate change seriously. As the most existential public health threat of the 21st century. I'm also a volunteer with Dr. Natalia Linos' campaign for Congress, and I hope everyone checks her out.
Great, thank you. And lastly, we have the Harvard Undergraduates for Environmental Justice.
Hi, I'm Ava. I'm one of the coordinators for Harvard Undergrads for Environmental Justice, or HUGE. Thanks so much again for putting on such a great panel today. We're an organization of undergrads that was briefly mentioned earlier as kind of the one of the organizations at Harvard that's focused on the climate crisis, but specifically from the lens of social justice and other sorts of issues having to do with fundamental human, civil, and social rights. And we have lots of different project groups and initiatives that range from just outreach and discussions and conversation to things such as just project development and political activism to try and bring voices to the table and figure out how to solve the climate crisis and other environmental issues in a way that's equitable. So for any interested undergrads, we're always available and always doing stuff. And it's great to be here. Thanks so much.
Great, well, thank you to our co-hosting organizations. Thank you to our speakers, thank you to our moderators. Harvard Forward, there are just 6 days left to vote. The election closes August 18th at 5 p.m. If you're an alum, please, please, please vote. It takes 2 minutes online at harvardforward.org/vote. And if whoever you are, please be sure to tell all the alumni you know to vote. We'll be having a bunch of other events this weekend, final get out the vote, town hall, virtual rallies. So check out our website for more information on that.